Fire the nuclear weapons!
Stephen, that was good. But do you think you could give it another try, this time say it in a less alarming way?
Less alarming? I've just given the order to fire the nuclear weapons. I've just unleashed Armageddon.
Yes, but the feeling here is that you could do it in a way which is a little less dramatic. It's just a little bit over the top at the moment. Have fun with it.
Fire the nuclear weapons!
So just as a caveat before we get started here, I wanted to say this up front. Nothing I discuss here will be of any classified material at all. In fact, it's all derived from open sources, newspaper articles and like. I will not discuss classified information, nor information that may be declassified, but I don't know. In either case, I have no reason to believe that you, the listener, has a need to know that information, and therefore I will not discuss it. If that's a problem for you, well, I don't know what to tell you. It's the way of things. It's the way I was trained. It's the way I was raised. And I do consider it in some ways raised by the Navy. But my experience 40 years ago has taught me a few things along the way. One of them is that I don't trust politicians. I don't really care what stripe they are. I don't care what particular political party they belong to. I don't care. I just don't care. I don't trust them. Even the ones that I like, I don't trust. As Ronald Reagan once said, trust but verify, and that's virtually impossible to do when it comes to politicians. Why? Because they make it virtually impossible to verify anything that they're doing. Their actions are often clouded by duplicitous reasoning that leaves you wondering, what are they really doing? What's really going on here? And so, over the past week or so, as I watched the news, I noted that there are numerous Republicans, politicians, and websites and the like that are, quote, deeply concerned about the cognitive abilities of the president. Whether it's his lack of ability to speak publicly or the fact that he needs his wife leaning on him to speak, whatever the reasoning is, they seem to have some real concerns about this. That does not in any way, shape, or form surprise me. I mean, if that upsets you, but you weren't upset about the things they were saying about Donald Trump's mindset for the last 4 years, really kiss off, because you're just literally being partisan. But what intrigued me was now we have at least 30 Democratic Congress members, not Senate, but House, who have sent a letter to the president asking him to consider something that they would like him to do. Now, one of these congressmen is indeed one of my favorite people in the world, Ted Lieu. And I say that sarcastically. Ted Lieu and I have a long history of combative discussions, I guess, going back to his days in the state legislature in California. Ted Lieu is, in my view, a career opportunist. That's what he is. He is a person that has parlayed opportunism and political correctness into a career in public service where he has made a lot of money without actually any real accomplishment. Did get himself elected to Congress, so I guess he's one up on me, right? Ted Lieu, and along with some other congressmen, joined by 30 Democratic congressmen, sent the President of the United States a letter in which they requested that he please consider divesting himself, the president, of the so-called nuclear launch codes. This might more commonly be known as the nuclear football. It's the big bag that there's an officer always within reach of the president carries around. The bag that when Donald Trump went to China, I guess, they had a big big brouhaha between the Secret Service and the Chinese security people over. Anyway, this bag is ubiquitous. It's been around for nigh on to 70 years, I guess now, and it contains the launch codes for our posture, our nuclear posture, in the event that the United States decides to deploy nuclear weapons. Now, there are other things in there as well. There are what are known as strike options and some emergency action codes and some radio stuff and the source of that. But one of the main things that's in there is the actual codes. The president has to have actual authorization codes that he, as what is known as the National Command Authority, or NCA, will use to authenticate any message that he sends to the units that would be tasked with carrying out the deployment of nuclear weapons. The president is, in our system, the sole, albeit with some advice, I'm sure, the sole responsibility for the deployment of nuclear weapons in the United States arsenal. Now, it's always been that way, folks. The president has always been the one to make that decision from Harry Truman on. There are those who like to pretend that the National Command Authority acronym means that there's a team of people that makes this decision. There are people who like to believe that, the Secretary of State, like Henry Kissinger, has some influence with the president, so that when Richard Nixon suggests, drunkenly, using atomic weapons to pacify North Vietnam, it doesn't get really taken seriously, and there's some truth to that. I don't believe, and I've never believed, that one man has all of that authority. I know technically he does, but I don't know that any one president, I don't know that any one person could make that decision by himself. He might make the final decision like Truman, but he's going to have some input, folks. Particularly if it's what these people obviously fear, a first strike use, where we are attacking someone else with the weapons. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I was 23 years old when I qualified fire control supervisor aboard USS Michigan. I was a ballistic missile fire control technician. And by the time I was 24, I was the battle station's missile supervisor, meaning that, well, you've heard the phrase, the finger on the button. That was my right index finger. From 1984 to 1987, that was me. The realization that at the age of 23 and 24, you are responsible for these weapons. The incredible amount of training you go through. The overwhelming procedural compliance issues. You don't do anything in a nuclear weapons situation without following the procedure. You just don't. Even if it's as simple as rebooting the computer, folks. I'm serious. We would have to reboot our digital control computer every 6 hours. It's a good habit to get into. It's something I really should do here, but I don't. But we would reboot it just to make it clear and get it, in a clean operational position. We had a procedure for doing this. It is literally 2 buttons. You go to fire control test, stop, start. 60 seconds later, the computer's back up. You go back to standby. That's it. I mean, I could do it in my sleep, but you damn well better have that procedure out, because you're dealing with something that deals with nuclear weapons. You follow the procedures or you don't work here. It's that simple. The overwhelming amount of training that we go through, years and then constantly on beyond that, is something that I look back on fondly. I really do, because it drilled it into me. Procedural compliance, safety and security issues, taking things seriously rather than flippantly. Now, most presidents, since the introduction of this system, have not had that training. They don't have that familiarity. In fact, frankly, I doubt, with only a couple of exceptions, any of them could even describe to you how a weapon works, let alone which ones are used in this situation, that situation, whatever. They do not have that training. They do not have that knowledge. They do not have that understanding that we gained by being very young and responsible for these weapons. And nothing will drive that home to you faster than the realization that when we're at sea, and again, 40 years ago, I don't know what they do today. But 40 years ago, when we went to sea, when we went what was known as alert, covering targets for the United States operational plan for the deployment of nuclear weapons, the point defense of nuclear deterrence of the United States, we didn't practice our targeting and simulated launches on open ocean areas. We used live targets. We used the ideas that basically there was one switch out of position. We would go through the whole rigmarole of targeting a weapon, getting it ready to go, bringing it up right to the point where if that one switch was in the other position, well, we even use the same firing key. The weapons officer uses the exact same firing key he would use to trigger a live weapon for a test launch, for a simulated system test. Same one. Everything is the same except for one switch. It's out of position, routes the firing signal to ground, and we practice like we play. Real live targets. And nothing will wake you up. Nothing will show you the seriousness of this as much as getting woken up in the middle of the night or early in the morning and being told, retarget and strike, going to the Missile Control Center, picking up the message that has the information on it, and seeing a message that's missing a part of the header that should be on the message. It should say across the top, Sierra, India, Mike, Uniform, Lima, Alpha, Tango, Echo, simulate. But there came a day when that was not on the message. I was 24, maybe 25. I could probably look it up and tell you the exact date because I know exactly what was happening in the world that day. Don't care that much. But it was missing that, and for probably 30 to 40 seconds, I believed that I was being tasked with targeting and launching a nuclear weapon against an enemy of the United States. Nothing will cause you to grow up faster than that. Well, I'm assuming combat would, but it's something that will wake you up. Now, as it turns out, the message paper had been shifted and the Sierra India Michael Uniform Tango Echo had been cut off the message that I was supposed to get, and it was simulated, but I didn't know that for a good 30 or 40 seconds. It's a very unnerving feeling. It was a very, it was a wake-up call. I mean, it really was. And it was something that, to this day, 40 years later, I still consider. Because the men who are tasked by our system with issuing that launch order have no such training. They have not contemplated those things. They have not sat down and said, okay, I want to be president of the United States. What would I do if? They've not war-gamed it in their mind. They've not played this out. They've not thought about these things. Do you really honestly believe that Joe Biden in the last year and a half before he was elected president, do you really think that he considered those things? Do you think Donald Trump ever did? I'm fairly confident George H.W. Bush did, but the rest of them, I have no faith in it whatsoever. I have no belief that they did that. None whatsoever. But that being the case, the reality is that these men are not trained in those ways of thinking, nor do they have the knowledge that we have with regards to how the weapons work, what we're going to do with it, what the end result of it's going to be. The National Command Authority as the president has been the case, again, as I said, since Truman in 1945, when he made the decision, after consulting with Leslie Grove and Curtis LeMay and other members of his inner sanctum there, as to whether or not we should do this. This is, I mean, he didn't just make the decision himself, nor would any president today do that. Certainly they would have input from other people. They would think about it. There would be, it's the line from Yes, Prime Minister. What if I got drunk and ordered the missiles launched? Well, on the whole, it would be better if you didn't get drunk. There are checks and balances, but they're not discussed because ultimately it has to be one person. It has to be one guy, because the more people you have in this system, the more points for compromise there are. You follow what I'm saying there? The more opportunities there are to muck the system up, the more people you get involved with it. So ultimately, one guy makes this decision, and that's the way it should be. So it's been the president. We decided this a long time ago. It's been that way certainly since the era of SAC in the 50s and 60s. It has continued that way. It was certainly that way when I was in. And it can be a little sobering sometimes to think about the National Command Authority, the president, when it's somebody that you don't trust, and I don't trust any politician, but when it's somebody you really don't trust, their motives and their methodologies, it can really be sobering. So when these 30 Democrats send this letter to the president asking him to consider, please, Mr. President, consider divesting yourself of the nuclear launch codes so that he and he alone would not be responsible for the implementation of U.S. nuclear deterrent policy. Now, they've asked for, again, as I just said, they've asked for more steps to be inserted. Secretary of Defense, Congress needs to be involved. It needs to be a group decision, not just one guy, which, of course, throws monkeys into the wrenches of the whole thing and how it's supposed to work. And therein lies part of the problem. Now, it's possible that these 30 congressmen, led by Ted Lieu, my hero, are actually concerned about the president and his intellectual prowess. That's what we're led to believe. That they are hinting that they have concerns about Joe Biden's, mental state. Certainly others were deeply concerned about the previous president's state of mind and his finger on the button, as it were. In fact, in the third week of November of last year, Wired magazine, which occasionally is actually a pretty good magazine, ran a complete article about Trump still has control of the nuclear arsenal. Well, no kidding. He's still the president. They didn't like that. They wanted that. Well, he lost. He should lose. He shouldn't have these codes. I mean, what happens if, before January 20th, what happens if he decides to get us into a nuclear war? Well, he didn't. So really, what's the problem? When these congressmen sent this letter, it really could be that they're concerned about the president's intellectual prowess. I don't think they are. Again, all politicians are duplicitous, they're two-faced, and there's something else going on here. And given the nature of the people we're talking about here, Ted Lieu, my conclusion is that they just don't have any clue what they're talking about. And they're touting a party line about, nuclear, doing away with nuclear weapons. And they think that by having more people involved with it, it'll make them less likely to be used, which is exactly the opposite of what will actually happen. The last question that I'm left with is, if these people, and here's the thing, this is how I know that they don't really care about Joe Biden's, they're not worried about that. They're trying to change nuclear defense policy because they don't like it. And rather than passing a law saying, let's change the way we do things, they want the president to voluntarily give it up to them, along with a few of their choice selected people. The last question I ask myself is, if Joe Biden is really not capable of making the decisions needed to be made relating to the nuclear posture of the United States, why are we asking, again, if he's mentally incompetent and can't make that decision, we don't trust him to make that decision, why are we trying to make him make the decision to consider changing the system? If he's not competent to do one, he's not competent to do the other. Moreover, if Democrats really do believe that this is the case, that President Biden can't be trusted with the nuclear codes, that President Biden is, cognitively losing it, isn't there some other way of making sure that the nuclear football is passed off or handed off to more competent hands? Something in my brain says there's another way to do that, isn't there?